Why are some people always called too sensitive? Why do they get tired sooner, overflow emotionally, and feel that the world demands more from them than they can give? Why the more they try to adapt, the more pain they experience? And there is an even more disturbing question. What if the problem weren't in them, but in the environment surrounding them? Stay, because understanding this can completely change how you see yourself and how you survive in this world. From a very early age, many people carry a label they didn't choose. Too sensitive, too emotional, too intense. They hear it at home, at school, at work, and over time, they end up repeating it silently within their own minds. They learn to observe themselves with suspicion, as if there were something defective in their way of reacting to the world. It's not just about crying out of sadness. Sometimes tears appear in the midst of anger, frustration, or extreme exhaustion. They arise when the load is excessive, when words are no longer enough and the body decides to speak for itself. And in that moment, shame arrives. The feeling of having failed, of not knowing how to control oneself, of being too much for others. To survive, many develop concealment strategies. They learn to harden themselves, to keep quiet, to pretend that nothing affects them. They train themselves to reduce their intensity, convinced that they will fit in better that way. But that adaptation has a high price. Inside, the wear and tear continues. The disconnection from oneself becomes constant, and emotional fatigue accumulates without anyone noticing. What is rarely explained is that this way of feeling is not a mistake or a whim. It has a name and a scientific basis. It is known as sensory processing sensitivity or sensory processing sensitivity. It is not a disorder or a weakness, but a neurological trait present in approximately 20% of the population. These people process information more deeply, pick up more stimuli, and react with greater intensity to what happens around them. This means that they not only perceive more, but also reflect more on what they perceive. They analyze, connect, anticipate. Their nervous system is designed to register nuances that others overlook. The problem arises when this trait, which is essentially a capability, develops in an environment that neither understands nor protects it. Before understanding why this sensitivity has been so misunderstood, it is necessary to change the question. It's not about what these people lack, but what function they serve. And to discover it, one must look much further back, toward biology and evolution, where this way of being had a clear sense and a reason for existing. To truly understand highly sensitive people, it is necessary to abandon the idea that all human beings are designed to respond to the world in the same way. Biology has never worked like that. Throughout evolution, different survival strategies have coexisted, each with its own strengths and limits. One of the clearest metaphors to explain it is that of dandelions and orchids. Dandelions can grow almost anywhere. They withstand cold, drought, lack of nutrients, and sudden environmental changes. They don't need special conditions to survive. They adapt quickly, resist well, and continue moving forward even in hostile terrain. Many people function this way. They are more robust against stress, less affected by noise, social pressure, or intense emotional conflicts. Orchids, on the other hand, are different. They don't grow just anywhere. They need specific conditions to develop: the right light, the correct humidity, the precise balance. When the environment is hostile, they wither quickly. But when conditions are favorable, they bloom with extraordinary strength, beauty, and complexity. Highly sensitive people function like orchids. Their nervous system is designed to detect nuances. They perceive subtle changes in the environment, in the emotional state of others, in the tone of a conversation, or in a situation that is starting to become dangerous. Their brain processes information with greater depth, connecting details that others ignore. This capacity doesn't appear by chance. It has a clear function within the group. In evolutionary terms, human orchids were the first to notice when something wasn't right. They detected threats before they became evident. They anticipated conflicts, climate changes, social tensions. Their sensitivity allowed the group to react in advance. They weren't made to resist any environment, but to read it with precision. The problem appears when an orchid is evaluated by the criteria of a dandelion. When someone designed to perceive and process in depth is expected to act as if nothing affected them. Under those expectations, sensitivity stops looking like an advantage and starts to be seen as a defect. But it is not. It is simply a different strategy. Understanding this difference changes the narrative. Not all people need to harden themselves to survive. Some need adequate conditions to deploy their potential. And here a key question arises. If this sensitivity is an advantage in certain contexts, why do so many highly sensitive people live exhausted, overwhelmed, and at their limit? The answer is not in them, but in the environment in which they attempt to flourish. Here appears the great paradox that many highly sensitive people live every day. They know deep down that they have a special perception, a deep capacity to understand, connect, and anticipate, and yet they feel exhausted, overloaded, and in many cases, broken. The question inevitably arises, if this sensitivity is an advantage, why does it hurt so much to exist with it? The answer lies in a key concept that is rarely explained clearly. Sensitivity is not an absolute advantage. It is a conditional advantage. In psychology, it is known as vantage sensitivity. This means that highly sensitive people do not react slightly more than others to the environment, but much more. When the environment is negative, chaotic, or aggressive, the impact is devastating. But when the environment is favorable, nourishing, and stable, the growth is extraordinary. In a hostile environment, a highly sensitive person doesn't just suffer more. They learn worse, regulate themselves worse, and wear out faster. Constant stress consumes their energy, clouds their mental clarity, and weakens their recovery capacity. Not because they are fragile, but because their system is designed to register every stimulus with high resolution. It's like living with a microphone always turned on at maximum volume. On the other hand, when the environment is right, the opposite happens. These people learn faster, develop greater creativity, show a deep empathy and a capacity for analysis that exceeds the average. They thrive not in spite of their sensitivity, but because of it. The same characteristic that sinks them in a wrong context elevates them in a correct one. This is where the metaphor of the greenhouse comes in. An orchid doesn't need to become harder to survive. It needs an environment that regulates light, temperature, and humidity. Likewise, a highly sensitive person doesn't need to stop feeling. They need conditions that protect their nervous system so it can function as it was designed. The most common mistake is trying to strengthen the person while ignoring the environment. They are told that they must be more resistant, colder, tougher. But that is like demanding that an orchid survive in the desert. It might endure for a while, but the internal cost will be enormous. This point marks an important turn. The problem is not the sensitivity. The problem is the mismatch between that sensitivity and the world in which it tries to survive. And to understand why that mismatch is so extreme today, one must look at how the human environment has changed in a very short time and why our nervous system has not had a chance to adapt. The human nervous system was not designed for the world in which we live today. For thousands of years, life passed at a slow pace, with limited stimuli and natural periods of rest. The danger was real but occasional. Silence, darkness, and calm were part of daily life. For highly sensitive people, this environment was not a constant threat, but a space that they could read and anticipate. The modern world broke that balance in just a few decades. Continuous noise, artificial lights, screens, notifications, constant information, and a social pressure that never stops. For a highly sensitive nervous system, this is not simply uncomfortable, it is a permanent overload. There is no off button. The body remains in a prolonged state of alert, even when there is no real danger. Unlike other people, the highly sensitive do not have a strong filter that blocks irrelevant stimuli. Everything enters. Everything is processed. Everything leaves a mark. The result is what is known as systemic overload. The organism functions as if it were always on the edge, even though externally nothing extraordinary is happening. This constant activation has deep consequences. Chronic fatigue, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and a diffuse sense of threat that never entirely disappears emerge. Rest stops being restorative because even the moments that should be quiet are full of stimuli. The body does not manage to return to a state of safety. In this context, many highly sensitive people blame themselves. They believe that they are not made for adult life, that something in them is failing, that they do not have the necessary strength. But the reality is different. They are not failing. They are trying to function with an ancient biology in a radically new and extremely aggressive environment for their system. This mismatch explains why even apparently harmless activities can be exhausting. Superficial conversations, crowded spaces, long workdays, or constant exposure to negative news act as small discharges that accumulated saturate the system. There is not enough time to recover between one and the other. Understanding this is crucial because it points to the true point of intervention. It's not just about enduring the world better, but about redesigning the relationship with it. And this is where a central tool for the survival of highly sensitive people appears: the sensory diet and the conscious creation of a personal greenhouse that allows the nervous system to rest, recover, and bloom again. When it is understood that the problem is not sensitivity, but constant exposure to a poorly adjusted environment, an inevitable question arises. What can be done to survive without turning off inside? The answer is not in hardening oneself, but in learning to consciously regulate the stimuli that enter the system. This is called a sensory diet. A sensory diet has nothing to do with eating less or isolating oneself from the world, but with distinguishing between what drains energy and what restores it. Many highly sensitive people believe they are resting when, in reality, they are still consuming aggressive stimuli. Spending hours scrolling through the phone, maintaining superficial conversations without a break, or exposing oneself to constant noise is not rest, it is a different form of overload. The highly sensitive nervous system needs spaces that function like a greenhouse, physical and mental places where intensity is reduced and regulation becomes possible. Silence, soft light, slow pace, and predictability are not luxuries. They are biological needs. Without these elements, the body never leaves a state of alert. Within the sensory diet, some stimuli act as drainers. Excessive noise, constant interruptions, multitasking, and sustained social pressure consume internal resources at an accelerated rate. Others, on the other hand, are deeply nourishing. Nature, soft music, contact with beauty, slow movements, and chosen solitude allow the nervous system to reorganize itself. The most common mistake is trying to fit these restorative moments into the margins of the day, as if they were optional. For a highly sensitive person, they are not. They are the foundation that allows everything else to work. Without a stable greenhouse, even the greatest talents slowly wither away. Creating this greenhouse doesn't mean escaping from the world, but designing clear boundaries. It means deciding when to expose oneself and when to retreat. It means recognizing that energy is not infinite and that protecting it is an act of responsibility, not weakness. When the sensory diet is adequate, sensitivity stops being a constant burden and starts to feel like what it truly is: a deep capacity to perceive, create, and connect. However, even with a well-built greenhouse, there is a silent enemy that continues to attack every day, often without being noticed. An enemy that fits in your pocket and continuously alters the brain's chemistry. To understand how to defend against it, it is necessary to look directly at the role of technology in modern life. There is a source of overload that many highly sensitive people underestimate because it has become completely normalized: technology. The mobile phone, the constant notifications, and the uninterrupted access to information act as sensory microaggressions that the nervous system receives without rest. They are not heavy blows, but small and repeated stimuli that keep the body in a permanent state of alert. The problem is not just the amount of information, but its form. Each notification triggers a small release of dopamine. It is not enough to generate real pleasure, but it is enough to create anticipation and tension. In highly sensitive people, this cycle produces a background anxiety that is rarely identified as such. The body expects something constantly, even when nothing happens. This state of low but continuous activation prevents deep recovery. Although externally it may seem that the person is resting, internally the nervous system continues to work. Attention fragments, calm becomes unstable, and the feeling of always being a little tired never entirely disappears. One of the simplest and most effective strategies to reduce this impact is to transform the relationship with technology. It is not about eliminating it, but about taking away its capacity for sensory attack. A clear example is the use of grayscale mode on the phone. By removing intense colors, visual stimulation is reduced, and with it, the automatic dopaminergic response. The device stops behaving like a constant hook and becomes a more neutral tool. This small modification has a profound effect. The urgency decreases, the compulsion drops, and the nervous system receives fewer signals of unnecessary activation. For a highly sensitive person, these adjustments are not tricks. They are basic defenses. They are equivalent to using hearing protection in a noisy environment. When technology stops dominating attention, internal space is freed up. And in that space, something essential appears: the ability to set emotional boundaries. Because sensitivity is not only affected by physical stimuli, but also by the emotional load of others. And without clear boundaries, even the best designed greenhouse can be invaded from within. One of the greatest challenges for highly sensitive people is not only the physical environment, but the emotional one. Their capacity to perceive the internal states of others is so deep that, many times, they end up absorbing emotions that do not belong to them. This phenomenon is known as the emotional sponge effect. It is not a metaphor. It is a daily experience in which the sadness, anxiety, or anger of others filters in without permission. Here is where a dangerous confusion appears. Believing that feeling with the other means carrying the other's load. Deep empathy can become a trap when it is not accompanied by clear boundaries. The difference between empathy and compassion is crucial. Empathy without boundaries submerges you in the pain of others. Compassion allows you to understand it without drowning in it. Many highly sensitive people believe that retreating emotionally is an act of selfishness. In reality, it is an act of psychological survival. Without boundaries, the nervous system never rests. Each interaction becomes an exposure, each conversation a possible overload. The result is deep exhaustion and a progressive loss of identity. Establishing boundaries does not require constant confrontations. Sometimes it begins with simple internal phrases, silent reminders that not everything that is felt must be held. Other times it involves using the pause protocol, stopping, breathing, and evaluating if one has enough energy before getting emotionally involved. Saying, "I cannot hold this right now," is not a betrayal, it is a form of honesty. Becoming the architect of one's own emotional environment means assuming an uncomfortable truth. No one else is going to build that greenhouse for you. The world is not going to become slower, quieter, or softer. But you can decide what you allow in, how long you expose yourself, and when you need to retreat to recover. Sensitivity is not something that should be corrected. It is something that must be protected. When the environment, the stimuli, and the boundaries are aligned, it stops being a constant burden and transforms into a source of depth, clarity, and sense. It is not about surviving by hardening oneself, but about living by creating the right conditions to flourish.